full week without Championship football for Norwich City, but they're back on the pitch tomorrow afternoon when they take on Stoke City at Carrow Road in a game that many expect them to win. But we've seen the last three. We know that it certainly isn't as straightforward as that. And here on Tactics Board, I'm going to break down why that is. You know the drill. First of all, I'm going to take you through my predicted starting 11 for the game. Then I'm going to take a closer look at Stoke and the sort of game that we might see pan out in NR1. And then we're going to come on to a little bit of a different topic of discussion, which this week is going to be something that's been on my mind for a little while. And that's whether Norwich need a more traditional number 10 in their formation to create a few more chances. But first of all, we're going to start with that predicted 11. So without further ado, here it is. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba in the centre of defence, with Lucian Mahovo at left back, Jacob Wright, Marcelino Nunez and Anis Ben Slimane in midfield, with Matej Jurasek on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Josh Sargent through the middle up front. Now obviously a couple of changes in there, and it's worth saying that I'm recording this before the press conference that will happen this afternoon. Of course, the injury situation is a little bit up in the air, especially with some of those key midfielders, Emi Marcondes, Kenny McLean and Marcelino Nunez in particular, all expected to return fairly soon. So we will have to wait and see which of those are available. But I believe the club have published some imagery of Nunez training, and he looks like he's part of the group as well. So you'd assume that unless there's been another injury, he's back available for this one. And then I've left the other two out just as sort of a precaution. But obviously you'd say that if either of them are fit, they have a very good chance of getting back into that 11, especially Norwich's captain, Kenny McLean. So that'll be, of course, quite a pivotal press conference, but I've gone with a team that doesn't include those two players just for sort of safety, and because I don't want to presume anything ahead of that press conference. But I think Nunez, if he is available, will come straight back in. Of course, it was a bit of a makeshift midfield at Hull of Jacob Wright, Jakob Sorensen and Anis Ben Slimane, and I still feel like Slimane has a bit of a claim to be in Norwich's best midfield three, but the other two at the moment maybe aren't quite there. And of Wright and Sorensen, I'd say that with both the short term and the long term in mind, it makes more sense for Torup to be picking Wright. Of course, he has started the last two, was thrown in when Kenny McLean withdrew from the Preston game in the warm-up, and looks like somebody who maybe has a better chance of a longer term future at Norwich, even though he's actually only on loan and Sorensen is a permanent player, because of course the latter is out of contract in the summer, and Norwich do have an option on Wright, who I think has sort of grown into his role at Norwich. Definitely struggled in the Preston game, and I thought even in the first half an hour against Hull he was pretty poor, gave the ball away a little bit too often, but settled into things, started to show his quality on and off the ball, and if he can continue that, then he'll start to challenge for a more regular starting berth, and certainly he'll start to prove that he's worthy of that option being triggered. But what was maybe interesting about that was the fact that he was in the slightly more advanced role. Sorensen played as the sort of six, that more traditional deep liar, and Wright actually moved a little bit further forward in the midfield, which maybe meant less defensive contribution or defensive responsibility, and he was freer to receive the ball in more attacking areas. I thought that suited him, and it will be a bit of a challenge if he does return to that pivot role to take the ball in slightly different areas and adapt his game a little bit. But really, it should be tougher to get the ball and distribute it well in that more attacking position when there's a bit more attention. There's probably a little bit less space as well, so it might even suit him, and it might even see his game improve if Torup does put him back at the base of midfield. So I've gone for that midfield three. Of course, if Nunez is available, he starts, and I don't think there are many Norwich fans who would dispute that. At the back, there's a change as well. I've gone for Cordoba over Doyle. Of course, Doyle is now suspended for 2 games after picking up his 10th yellow card of the Championship season. That means real opportunity for the Panamanian, who has had to sit out and be on the bench for the first time in his career in a while, really, having been the main man at his previous club, having arrived at Norwich and really impressed everyone, and there'd been a lot of fanfare around his signing. He now is in a position of having to prove something for the first time in a while, but Torop praised his professionalism when I asked about him last week, and it sounds like he's put himself in a good position to do that. Still has a good amount of quality on the ball and those distribution abilities. Maybe not quite to the level of Doyle, but what he lacks there, he probably makes up for in a bit of athleticism and pace. So Norwich should be able to press a little bit higher and leave their high line a little bit higher up the pitch as well. Because if the ball does go in behind, as Stoke are likely to make sure it does on quite a regular basis, Cordoba has a bit more of that pace and a bit more of that ability to get back and recover. So in a defensive sense, and in terms of Norwich's ability to get on the ball a bit higher up the pitch and create chances that way, Cordoba should really help them. Haven't gone for any other changes in the team because I think that whole performance actually was a little bit better. Of course, not the result that most people were hoping for, but they did equalise, having been 1-0 down, and they probably did. Well, you probably couldn't have complained if you were a Hull fan and you lost that game. Maybe it was quite a tight one, but I thought Norwich were much better in those final 60 minutes than they were in either the Preston or Derby games. So it feels like they were headed in the right direction. Maybe only minor tweaks needed at the moment rather than huge major reshuffles. And when you've got players like Mate Jurasek, still sort of getting used to things, that a lot of that development will come naturally rather than tinkering with the team. So I haven't gone for too many changes, but of course Torop will be forced into one at least and maybe tempted into a couple of others. So it will be interesting when that team news drops tomorrow afternoon. On to Stoke, and a team that maybe isn't particularly ideological under Mark Robins. He's somebody who sort of adapts to the opposition and changes the way his team sets up depending on what he wants them to do to stifle the team that they're playing and to exploit the weaknesses of those teams. But he's done that very effectively throughout his career. Of course, we've seen it with Coventry, and maybe he didn't have the best record against the club that he played for, but he's a very good, very capable tactician, and that might go against Norwich this weekend. Stoke have been very good at limiting the space between the lines when they've decided to go defensive. On an individual level, maybe not quite where they'd want to be pushing up the table and into that top half and towards the playoff picture, but tactically they're well drilled under Robins. They will stop players getting between the lines, and that's where the problem comes for Norwich, really, because they want to pass the ball between those lines. They want their players picking it up in those areas and then trying to slot the balls through eventually for Josh Sargent or Borja Sainz or Mate Jurasek, but Stoke won't give them much opportunity to do that. So they have to be very good at that, and that's an area that maybe they haven't thrived on, especially when Marcondes hasn't been available and he hasn't been picking up those number 10 positions that he likes to. Of course, that's a subject that we'll come on to in greater detail later on. But I think that's where the problem will be for Norwich. So they might need to find some alternative routes of chance creation. Of course, we know there are players like Sainz and Jurasek who can cut in, can score themselves, can be direct and create shooting opportunities by running at players and by trying to use their technical skill on the ball. So that could be something that Norwich try to do a little bit more, make it more of an individual battle, because you'd probably say that on an individual level and comparing the squads, they have a slightly better squad. So that might suit them. If it does become too much of a tactical game, and of course Norwich want to have a system that is tactical, that is reliable and that looks similar every game, but if they make it more of an individual battle, it feels like that might break the logjam as far as the sort of game that Stoke will try to create. Of course, along with that defensive strategy, they'll probably try to counter-attack at pace. That's something that Robins' teams have always done, and that's something that they've done at Stoke as well. Use the pace of the strikers and the wingers, get the ball into them early and get them running into the half where there should be a lot of space. That's probably an area where Cordoba's pace will help Norwich. And then for chance creation reasons and to stop those counter-attacks being effective, it's important that they press high really, really well. Stop those Stoke players from having the time to play the balls over the top and into the channels and into the space for those attacking players to get onto. And also, if Stoke are going to be compact and try to stop Norwich playing through, then actually if they want to score goals, nicking the ball in the final third, winning it in dangerous areas where Stoke aren't necessarily prepared to defend, where they have to spring into action and do some more improvised things, that might be a real area to exploit for Norwich, and that's something that I'm sure they'll be working on going into the game. But Stoke definitely do provide a unique challenge because Mark Robins is a little bit of a shapeshifter in terms of tactics, and he does do that very, very well. Now, I alluded to City's problems in the sort of number 10 position a couple of minutes ago. I said that this might be a game where that's sort of exposed a little bit, and I think that's something that we've seen become a bit of a theme over the season. Obviously, Norwich are a possession-based side who, as I said, want to play the ball through the lines and therefore will create a lot of chances by low through balls and by passes into Josh Sargent in and around the box where he can go one-on-one and he can finish a chance, or trying to get the ball to the byline through those little short passes and then getting cutbacks and tap-ins for Sargent and some of the sort of on-rushing midfielders who are crashing the box. But I don't really feel like they have the sort of player to link the midfield and the attack, especially when Marcondes isn't available. You look at that midfield, Nunez, Slimane, Wright, obviously McLean to come in as well, and all of those are sort of slightly more deep lying. I know not all of them are particularly defensive midfielders, but there's not really a number 10 in there who's going to score a lot of goals for you, who's going to get in and around the box, who's going to create a moment of magic out of nothing. And when you have that with the sort of front three that Norwich have, I think it's difficult to create the sorts of situations where you can score from possession-based play. Maybe if they had wingers who were more willing to get on the ball in deeper areas, and maybe the likes of Ante Cianats do fit into that bracket. But in terms of the first choice players who look like they're going to start a lot between now and the end of the season, there's Sainz and there's Jurasek, who both want to make something happen. They both want to dribble at players and be more direct rather than sort of interact in passing situations and play 1-2s and do things like that. They both have consistently throughout their careers scored more goals than claimed assists. And when you've got those types of really attacking wingers and some slightly deeper lying midfielders, finding the connection between that front three and that three in the middle is difficult when you don't have a sort of typical number 10. Now, the question is whether Norwich will ever pivot towards something like that. Of course, they have a couple of players who could sort of play that role. I think Marcondes positionally fits into that, even if he doesn't have maybe the traditional sort of flair of a number 10. Oscar Schwartau is a little bit similar as well, although I think he has slightly more of an attacking mind to him when he gets on the ball. He wants to nutmeg players, he wants to take them on, and he wants to find forward passes. But I still don't think they really have somebody with that natural ability to do that very, very well. And it could be that someone who they're trying to develop, and of course they have a number of young players who they're trying to really improve and take to the next level. It could be that one of those comes through and proves that they can be that number 10. But right now, I think they probably would be looking to the transfer market rather than internally. And it would also mean abandoning slightly a system that Torup has been working on basically since the start of his career as a head coach. So right now, I'm not sure it's particularly likely, but if I were in charge, which of course I'm very, very far away from being, that might be something I would consider. So it'll be interesting to see if Norwich can still create those chances from those sorts of through balls and more possession-based scenarios against Stoke. It could be that I'm proven completely wrong, and I'm sure we'd all be happy with that if it meant plenty of goals, plenty of entertainment, and 3 points on the board again for Norwich City. Of course, we'll have all of the game covered, everything you need across at pinkun.com/subscribe. So go there if you haven't already. Thank you very much for joining me on Tactics Board, and I'll see you very soon.